In 2015, King Richard III of England was reburied with a royal ceremony in Leicester Cathedral. The woman behind the discovery, historian Philippa Langley, led the search that, against all the odds, found the remains of the medieval king in a nearby car park and rewrote history books. Now, with the help of criminal barrister Rob Rinder,
this is too intriguing to ignore.
She believes she can finally crack one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in history.
The idea of us being like Mulder and Scully of the medieval world.
It's 1483. Two young princes are murdered at the Tower of London on the orders of their uncle, King Richard III. Later immortalized by Shakespeare as a royal villain. And this story has been established history for the last 500 years.
Well, that is probably the darkest chapter in the Tower's long history.
But Philippa doesn't believe that's what actually happened.
So, Rob, we're in the Tower.
It's only a matter of time for you, Philippa, let's face it.
Philippa has been trying to piece together what really happened to the princes in the Tower. She's taking Rob Rinder on a journey across Europe.
Wow.
The elder of the princes in the Tower, Edward, came here in 1487.
To look at astonishing new evidence.
Now comes the real treasure.
Wow, wow, wow.
This is a forgery, it's a fake.
Discovered by her team of researchers.
I mean, this is history right here.
What they found could change history forever.
It is truly something.
This is a smoking gun document.
For the last 7 years, I've been investigating the story of the two princes. Working with an army of researchers, we've made the most startling discoveries, which I believe prove what happened to the missing princes. And it's a very different story to the one in most history books. So, I'm going to see the criminal barrister, Rob Rinder. He's been very successfully involved in a number of high-profile murder cases. He's spent decades assessing evidence in his professional life, and he's also studied history at university. I want to take him to see our findings firsthand so he can challenge them for himself. I want to find out if I can convince a professional skeptic that I'm right.
So, Philippa, as I understand it, your view is that we need to relook at the murder of the princes in the Tower. Is that the point?
That is absolutely the point, and I've spent a number of years doing this. I think very strongly that truth matters. The project is called the Missing Princes Project.
Right.
In 2016, Philippa put out a call for volunteers willing to search local archives for evidence of the missing princes.
I was inundated. The finds that they've made have been extraordinary. And if these finds are real, then they have the potential to rewrite history.
That's quite a significant claim.
I think the princes weren't murdered. I think they actually survived King Richard's reign. However, I haven't seen these discoveries. I've been told what's in them. I need a criminal forensic mind who can look at this material that I've got and evaluate it. This is why I'm here. I'd like you to come with me. You would be seeing them fresh with me for the very first time.
When you came in here, I thought you might be a bit of an activist, perhaps a crank, you know?
Yeah.
And forgive me if that sounds harsh. I'm now sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, this is too intriguing to ignore. So let's do it. I think we should do it. Yes. When Philippa arrived, I had a strong sense of who killed the princess in the tower, Richard III. My next step is to start from the beginning. I want to forget everything Philippa's told me and meet a serious historian that's going to tell me the established version of events.
Rob is on his way to the Tower of London to speak with a medieval historian about the prince's story.
So I'm here to learn a little bit about the princess in the tower.
Well, that is probably the darkest chapter in the Tower's long history, and it's still, of course, the subject of intense debate today. So should we go and find out more? The princes were the sons of King Edward IV, a very popular king. But he died quite suddenly of a fever in 1483. And that plunged the country into uncertainty because his sons were only aged 12 and 9. So the eldest of them still too young to rule. So on his deathbed, Edward IV appointed his brother, Richard of Gloucester, to be Lord Protector until his eldest son had come of age.
So their uncle brings the princess here for their protection. What's going on that they, well, need to be protected?
England has only just come out of what was known as the Wars of the Roses. And now this was between two warring houses, the House of York and Lancaster. And so the crown keeps changing hands. And it has only recently become more stable under Edward IV. And now all of that is thrown into doubt.
After 30 years of war between England's two most powerful families, the country needed stability.
So we're in what's known today as the Bloody Tower. Not long after being brought here, things took a dramatic turn because those boys were declared illegitimate. It was said that their father, Edward IV, was already married at the time that he married their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, which basically invalidated that marriage. So now they're illegitimate and they have no right to the throne. And shortly afterwards, on the 6th of July, their uncle Richard is declared King Richard III.
So where did they go next?
So they went over there towards the White Tower, the oldest part of the tower, and it was also the most closely guarded. So we're here in the White Tower. When they first arrived in the Tower of London, they were treated honourably. They were seen playing in the gardens, shooting arrows. Then by the autumn of 1483, those boys were never seen again. And it was widely assumed at the time, and has been ever since, that they had been quietly murdered.
So what evidence do you have that they were murdered?
So this is an account written at the time by an Italian monk visiting London. He was called Dominic Mancini. So he talks about those two princes conducted into the more inward apartments of the tower itself, and day by day came to be observed more rarely through lattices and windows.
So who else speaks about this?
Well, somebody rather famous from the Tudor period is Thomas More, of course, a lawyer, statesman, and we think about 50 years after the disappearance of the princes, More wrote his account.
What does he actually say?
So More claims that Richard III ordered the murder of his nephews, and he names names. James Tyrrell was a servant of Richard's. He was the one who organised it and employed two henchmen, really, to carry out his dirty work. Here he describes in detail how the two murderers sort of crept in at midnight and smothered the boys with pillows hard into their mouths.
What other evidence is there? Any physical evidence, for instance, that the boys were murdered here?
Well, there is, and it's very important. It's a discovery that was made almost 200 years after the prince's disappearance.
What was this discovery?
Well, in 1674, King Charles II was on the throne, and he ordered the demolition of what was left of the old royal palace here. The builders discovered underneath a staircase 2 skeletons, and they were clearly skeletons of children. And the king was in no doubt. He had found the missing princes, and so those bones, those remains, were buried in Westminster Abbey, and they remain there to this day.
Scientists examined the bones in 1933 and concluded they were the remains of 2 children, aged around 9 and 12. But they've never been DNA tested.
So you think those bones found in that box during the reign of Charles II are the princes in the tower?
I think there's a very strong likelihood.
Beyond reasonable doubt?
I think when it comes to the princes in the tower, there's always going to be doubt.
Philippa believes the existing evidence of the princes' murders is unreliable. In 1485, Henry VII defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. Henry went looking for the princes. If they were alive, they would be a threat to his crown, but he was unable to find them. Henry destroyed documents related to Richard's reign, but Philippa's team believes they have found new sources in Europe where the princes had family. Philippa and Rob are in France to look at the first big discovery.
Love when you land in France. It immediately looks French.
Yeah, I totally get that.
This idea of us being like Mulder and Scully of the medieval world. Medieval X-Files, only without the aliens. So you brought me to Lille. It's beautiful. What's this got to do with the princess in the tower, Philippa?
Well, I'm taking you to show you something very special.
Philippa's team believes they found some key evidence from 1487. The princes had disappeared 4 years earlier. It's the last year of the Wars of the Roses, when a huge force invades England. The team has found a document that suggests who is behind the attack.
I know a bit about what's coming, but I've not seen the real thing, and I've been waiting for this for a long time, so yeah.
When we found these documents, we can't believe what we read. It was a completely shocking moment. Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah. Wow.
You seem to be very excited.
Very excited to see it again. Wow. Here it is.
Gosh.
Have a look, Rob. Have a look, Philippa.
This is incredible to see it for real in life, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, this is history right here.
Yeah, it is.
It's remarkable.
It's more than 500 years old.
I can obviously feel your excitement, both of you, but what am I looking at, Natalie?
Well, you are looking at a receipt from the year 1487. It's for King Maximilian,
Who's that?
the king of the Holy Roman Empire at the time.
King Maximilian was a powerful ruler in medieval Europe. As the leader of the Holy Roman Empire, he controlled a vast swathe of Europe.
And this is a receipt for what?
He ordered 400 long pikes. And it was used by Maximilian's elite troops.
Okay, so why is this important?
The receipt says, in medieval French, these pikes were to be distributed among the German Swiss pikemen whom Madame the Dowager sent at that time to serve her nephew, son of King Edward, who was expelled from his dominion. This document is really important because it's telling us that the force for 1487 that was going to invade England was for the son of King Edward IV, the elder prince in the tower.
Have you ever seen any reference to, well, the boy being alive before, like this?
No, that's why it's so unique.
Madam the Dowager, now who's that referring to?
This is referring to Margaret of York, also known as Margaret of Burgundy, and she's the sister of Richard III and Edward IV.
So she's the prince's aunt?
She's the prince's aunt. Hugely important in this story.
Well, just to be clear, it means that Margaret of Burgundy, who is Edward's aunt, is buying these weapons because she believes for sure that the boy is definitely her nephew.
Yes.
But the document doesn't actually name the elder prince, it just says her nephew. So it could have been the younger prince, no?
It must have been the elder boy because he was about 16. It says, expelled from his dominion, which suggests the elder brother because he would have been crowned king. Right description, her nephew, and also son of King Edward. So you've got 4 pointers there to tell us who this was.
How is it conclusive?
It's not a chronicle. It's not somebody writing afterwards. It's just an accounting receipt.
Right, this isn't from a historian, there's no bias here, it's just ordering goods.
Yeah.
And people don't order goods like this unless they're confident about who it's for.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's why it's persuasive. So who signs or who gives their stamp on this document?
It's signed by not just one secretary for Maximilian, but then he gets it double-checked by 2 other leading members of Maximilian's court. So they are saying this is accurate.
And these 3 men that work for Maximilian believed that this was the older of the boys.
Yeah, and it's very specific wording, and these are very high court officials.
I can really understand Natalie and, of course, Philippa's excitement. I mean, here we've got a document which mentions one of the princes. This document, on the face of it, is proof of life. And what's more, it's written by an accountant, not a historian, not any person that's got any bias. That's the excitement. On the other hand, who is this Margaret of Burgundy? She's the aunt of the boys in the tower, who has reason to perhaps make this up. What motivations might she have had to invade England?
Margaret of Burgundy was one of the most powerful women in medieval Europe and a relative of King Maximilian. A passionate supporter of the Yorkist cause, she was a staunch enemy of Henry VII, the Tudor king who killed her brother, Richard III. Philippa believes Margaret helped her nephew Edward, the elder prince in the Tower, amass a fleet to invade England. But first, the fleet sailed to Ireland for an important ceremony.
This is Christ Church Cathedral, the oldest medieval church in Dublin. We're going to meet a historian who, like me, believes that the force mustering here was led by Edward, the older prince.
Come here today because I think one of the most interesting and important events in late medieval history took place here on the 27th of May, 1487, when King Edward was crowned.
So by King Edward, do you mean one of the princes in the Tower?
My reading of lots of the evidence is that the elder of the princes in the Tower, Edward, came here in 1487 to undergo a coronation.
Matt, what's your evidence for believing that this was the coronation of the older of the princes in the Tower?
So one of the people who's here for the coronation is a guy called John de la Pole. He's the senior Yorkist heir in 1487. When Richard III's son dies, he's considered next in line to the throne. So if you want someone to champion, to replace Henry VII on the throne, John de la Pole is the man you would go to. But he comes here to attend this coronation for Edward.
This is a really important point, that he's sitting here in a church, in a religious service, acknowledging this man, boy, as king. He wouldn't have done that, is your point, unless he was solidly certain.
No way.
He believed, not just intellectually, but spiritually, that that was the real deal in front of him.
Yeah.
The The English government's official record, published 40 years later, states that an impostor named Lambert Simnel was crowned king.
Traditional history tells us Lambert Simnel, a 10-year-old boy, was found in Oxford and brought here to Ireland and was proclaimed and crowned King Edward of England.
Yeah. Who's going to follow a boy who's just come from Oxford? Who is going to fight and die for this boy?
And also, we've perhaps lost sight of just how important a medieval coronation was. It was a huge political moment, but a huge spiritual moment. Nobody would undertake that ceremony lightly, and no one would want to do that to a random boy from Oxford.
So what you believed happened here was that a 16-and-a-half-year-old was sitting here being crowned by, well, significant members of the church and the Irish nobility and others who showed up in force. And it's only later that they've said it was actually a 10-year-old and it's all made up. And that's part of the propaganda of Henry VII.
That's what I believe. Yeah. I believe all of that Lambert Simnel business is big smoke and mirrors thrown up around what would have been a hugely threatening moment for Henry VII.
Clearly, there was a boy crowned here in this church. Fleet showed up. They went through a ceremony, a religious ceremony. Whether or not that means that that's one of the boys in the tower, I'm not yet confident about. But applying my dispassionate mind, that's certainly some evidence that the older boy, Edward, that prince in the tower, could have been the person that they crowned here.
A week after the Dublin coronation, the Yorkist fleet invaded England. Established history tells us that the impostor Lambert Simnel led the force, but Philippa believes that it was Edward, the eldest of the missing princes, who led the army.
I have to say, Philippa, I still find the Lambert Simnel, or is it Prince Edward story, really confusing. I hope where we're going now might help me with that.
We're on our way to Stoke battlefield.
Right, okay, so is this where Edward's invasion army came to face Henry VII?
Exactly. And we're going to meet Matthew Lewis again, and he's going to tell us all about the battle.
Welcome to the site of the Battle of Stoke in 1487. This was the site of the last pitched battle of the Wars of the Roses, that kind of 30-odd-year fight for the crown of England. Thousands of men crowded this field. Many of them travelled huge distances to be here, and many of them would never walk off this field alive.
Oh, that's really affecting. Seriously affecting.
Now, the question is it Edward or some person called Lambert Simnel?
That is the big question. If I'm a mercenary, a professional soldier, I might start laughing when someone says, we want you to follow this 10-year-old boy into battle.
It's just so kind of evocative standing here. So what's the outcome? What happens? How does it play out?
We know that they clash. There is a huge confrontation. And I think this is where Edward's army struggles against its own makeup. There are disparate amounts of Flemish soldiers, Swiss and German mercenaries, Irish cairns, also some Englishmen who have joined the force. They're just so smashed together. They all have different proficiencies, different ways of fighting, different languages, and they end up being routed. And the Irish begin to fall because they're not wearing any armour. One source talks about the field being littered with bodies that were pricked like hedgehogs with arrows after the battle, just men with half a dozen arrows in them lying all over the field.
But then there's this name at the centre of it, Edward. What happened to him?
We don't know. This is the frustrating part. We don't have a record of what happened to him after that.
What do the sources written by Henry VII, Henry Tudor, say about what happened to the person that led this army?
They're at great pains to tell us the story of this 10-year-old who is found to be named Lambert Simnel. He is pardoned by Henry, and he puts him to work in the royal kitchens.
Either way, the older of the princes in the tower is now out of commission, no longer a threat.
Yeah. But if Henry VII has just faced the greatest threat of his reign so far in 1487 from a prince who was 16 and a half years old, he knows that prince has a brother who is 2 or 3 years younger than him. So he's going to have to think, am I going to face the same problem in a few years' time?
Thank you, Matt.
Good luck with the rest of your investigation.
Thank you so much. So it's extraordinary to look at this field. You know, either that army is led by a pretender, Lambert Simnel, or the real Edward V dies on that battlefield. Either way, the trail goes cold. So what happens to Richard, his brother, the younger of the princes in the Tower?
We have to go back to Europe now to pick up that trail.
Philippa and Rob are in Holland, which was once part of the Holy Roman Empire. Her Dutch team has discovered a document about Edward's brother Richard, the younger prince in the Tower.
Have you seen it?
I know about it, I haven't seen it, but I think it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Wow.
Mind-blowing.
So what we're about to see is big.
Just tell him what it was like for you when you found it.
Well, I got goosebumps because it was so special, and I never had find anything like this before.
Someone actually found it in the 1950s, but they dismissed it, and it was quickly forgotten about.
Right.
So I've got the document here for you.
What about a date or anything like that?
It seems to be made between 1450, 1500. Yeah.
So this is within the period 1450 to 1500, slap bang in the middle.
Spot on. Yeah.
Right.
Rob, you are looking at Richard, the younger prince in the Tower's own story.
You think this is his voice?
This is his voice. It's written in the first person.
I.
Yes.
We think that the original would have been written in Latin or French, but this is a copy in Middle Dutch.
Shall we read it?
Yeah.
I was brought to my brother, who was already there in the Tower of London. Then what happens is we were separated. I was secretly taken into a room in a place where the lions are kept. Lord Howard came to me and encouraged me. At last, he ordered the guards to leave and then brought 2 other men. They were called Henry Percy and Thomas Percy. They swore by honor and oath to hide me secretly until certain years were past.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Lord Howard gets his 2 men, Henry and Thomas Percy, and gets them to swear to Howard that they're going to hide them secretly.
Yes. Yeah. Everyone he's mentioned so far was in the Tower of London in June 1483. I found them in the archives in Bedale in North Yorkshire.
Yeah, it
They
adds to the credibility and the reliability of the whole narrative.
So whoever's reporting this has to know these people, these
Yeah.
names. We don't know what happened to Edward at this point because they've been separated.
Yes.
But as far as Richard is concerned,
Yep.
Yeah.
the Percys are going to take care of him.
And guard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then what happens?
Then they shaved my hair and put a poor and drab skirt on me. And we went to St. Catherine's. St. Catherine's is a dockyard. There they took a boat and sailed to the sea and came ashore in the dunes of Boulogne-sur-Mer. From here, Richard stayed in Paris, and he goes on to tell us that he then travelled across Europe to various cities before being sailed to Portugal.
What a life.
Unreal, isn't it? Shortly afterwards, Henry Percy became ill with the plague. He told me that when he died, I would have to travel to Ireland. Then he died. May God save his soul. So Richard says that he then sailed to Ireland, where several Irish lords recognised him and accepted him for who he was.
So the people in Ireland acknowledge him as Richard II of the Princes in the Tower straight away.
Yes.
I mean, this is the stuff of kind of Game of Thrones.
It is.
Do you know what I mean?
It absolutely is.
Why didn't Percy just say straight away, let's go to Ireland?
They had sworn to keep him away till certain years have passed. So you can see that they're following that oath.
What happens next, Philippa?
Right, okay, so what happens next? I left and went to my dearest aunt, the Duchess of Burgundy, and by the grace of God, in a short time, I will obtain my right to which I was born.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me just...
Yeah.
Because this is way more significant than I was expecting. This is a story of roughly, how many years do we think?
10 years. 10.
10
10
years.
years.
10
It
years.
covers 10
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
1483 to 1493.
Okay.
Key years.
This looks to me like we have a person, possibly Richard, Duke of York, the second of the Boys in the Tower, who arrives in the court of Margaret of Burgundy, giving his life account to persuade her, let's say, I'm the real deal.
Yeah.
And this is a specific detail. Boy, is it specific detail.
Yeah.
Could this be the writing of somebody who is faking a life story?
If this is somebody who's trying to be the younger prince in the tower, you make it very general, but he's going into detail after detail after detail after detail.
We deal in documents as lawyers.
Yeah.
And if I saw this statement, it would be a critical break in the case. You know, this is a smoking gun document, there's no doubt about it. I need to calmly assess what it might all mean. You know, I have to be skeptical. I can't just look at this and go, wow, although it is a wow document. It is truly something. Well, thanks, Natalie.
No. I'm pleased. I'm pleased. You liked it.
With this new discovery placing the younger prince at the court of his aunt Margaret of Burgundy, Philippa and Rob head to her former home in the town of Banch in Belgium. They're meeting another member of the research group who has something new to show them. Philippa believes that after helping the older prince, Margaret went on to support his younger brother, Richard.
Wow. So Zoe, this is a ruin of where exactly?
This is the remains of the palace of Margaret of Burgundy.
This is her palace.
Yes, she lived here in retirement.
But it must have been pretty splendid at the time. I mean, she was loaded. She was very rich.
Yes, and if you just look to the right,
Yeah.
you see an arch, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's actually called Richard's room, what we know it as now.
Well, which Richard?
Is the younger prince in the tower. We believe that he stayed here, and she names a special room after him, Richard's room, which is there.
How do you know this?
Well, actually, the account books state that after renovating the palace, it's actually called Richard's room.
And I think what is lovely about this is by this point, when she's renovating this in 1496, the timing is absolutely spot on for the younger prince in the tower.
What's he doing here with Margaret, you know, in her retirement castle?
Well, it's a really important moment because Margaret of Burgundy is pulling all of her resources and all of Maximilian's resources behind Richard to support him, making his push for the throne.
So Zoe, how do we know that it was him?
Richard showed people 3 marks on his body that couldn't be faked.
So what's the evidence for these 3 marks?
Quite by chance, I found a document in the Austrian State Archive. So if you look here, the document is about Maximilian's meeting with Richard. And it states the reasons why Maximilian decided to give his support and his favor to Richard.
But who's written this account?
It is written by one of his French scribes present at the meeting.
What, when Richard, the possible prince, meets Maximilian?
Yes, presents himself.
We have a transcription here of the documents.
And it says, "My lord, the Duke of York, offers to present himself and show several signs by which those who knew him would recognize him, especially 3 natural marks which he has on his body and which cannot be counterfeited. That is, his mouth, one of his eyes, and a mark he has on his thigh. And that comes from Maximilian's court at the right time for the younger prince in the Tower, Richard, Duke of York.
Okay, thanks very much. My mind's a washing machine of stuff. I've been following Richard, the younger prince historian, and there have been 2 really big bombshell documents. There may be proof of life here. But the difficulty is, I have to acknowledge that I learnt my history in England, in the UK, right? And Rich III is the bad king. So every time I'm looking at a document, the most important thing I have to do is step back and imagine I know none of it. That's so essential. But the reality is that's really hard. It's a difficult thing not to bring your bias to a document.
Philippa has come to the medieval city of Dresden, once a major hub in the Holy Roman Empire. Her research team has found something special related to the younger prince in the Tower.
Natalie from the Dutch team has made a discovery at the Saxon State Archive. Rob can't come, so I'm going to be calling him about it from the archive. And I'm getting really excited.
She's meeting an expert in medieval manuscripts who's made a translation for her.
I'm incredibly excited. I've never seen it before, and I'm actually on tenterhooks.
So, do you want to see it?
Please.
It's a really lovely document. Now comes the real treasure. The seals. You see, 1493. We unfold it. And here we go. Isn't it lovely?
I can't believe this. I mean, this is just wow, wow, wow.
So at the bottom, you have the signature?
Yeah, I can see Richard of England. I can see his monogram.
Yeah.
That's really special. I've never seen that before. Do you mind if I just use the magnifier? I just want to... Oh, look at that. Richard of England. Oh, wow. That royal seal is just incredible. And even the little R at the bottom, the royal R. But what's really fascinating is it's the closed crown of a king. That's what this is depicting. And it's the Royal Arms of England. I mean, this is telling me it's a king. It's blowing my mind. Good God. It's just... I'm actually shaking. So, Enrique, this is a really extraordinary document, but can you tell me more about what it actually says? I think you've done a translation for me, is that right?
Yes, here it is. So this is Richard, Duke of York, son of King Edward IV, pledging 30,000 florins to Duke Albert of Saxony for support in regaining the throne of England. If he...
Sorry, how much?
30,000 florins. Each
what?
to the...
How much? I mean, that sounds like a lot to me, 30,000. How much is that in
It's a real
money?
princely sum, to be paid within 3 months once he has got the throne of England.
I really need to call Rob about this. Hi, dearest travel mate. Guess where I am? Dresden. We are looking at this most incredible document. I'm actually shaking at the moment, and I just wish you were here to see it. It is just, it's mind-blowing.
What have you found?
It's a pledge for 30,000 florins from Richard of England to give to Albert of Saxony within 3 months of him becoming king. I mean, can we show Rob, Henrika?
Let's have a look.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see this, but the royal seal here, there's a beautiful intact royal seal from Richard, the younger prince. And right at the bottom, there's a tiny little royal R.
That is extraordinary. Was 30,000 florins a lot of money back then? What are we talking?
It's difficult to specify exactly. It's throwing around big sums, and a sum meant to impress. It's the GDP of a medieval city or a castle or something like that.
You have to have some, there's no nice way of putting it, balls to go and promise that sort of sum unless you were pretty sure you were able to deliver on it.
Yeah, 100%.
So how do we know that this is Richard, the younger of the princes and the boys in the tower? How do we know it's his signature?
So Rob, let me just read you how the document begins, what it says. It says, Richard, by the grace of God, Duke of York, son and heir of our most revered Lord and Father, Edward IV, late King of England and France and Lord of Ireland. So he's making very clear that this is the younger prince in the tower.
It's a confident hand, obviously a contemporary hand, so what we can be fairly sure of is the charter is authentic, whoever signed it, but it's from that time and place it claims to be. And it's signed 4th of October, 1493.
Philippa, you look so happy.
I am. I'm in 7th heaven at the moment. I just wish you were here. Thanks, sweetie. Bye. Bye.
Philippa believes that the man she calls Richard, Duke of York, used his European backers' money to launch an attack on England. But the invasion fails, and he takes refuge with King James IV in Scotland. James treats him as an equal and finds him a wife, a royal cousin, and they have a son. But Henry VII's spies and allies at the Scottish court are briefing officials that the man called Richard is actually an imposter. The man Philippa believes was Richard launches 2 more invasions, but is eventually captured by Henry VII in 1497.
So, Rob, we're in the tower.
It's only a matter of time for you, Philippa, let's face it.
After years of challenging Henry VII, the man I believe is the younger prince, Richard, had been captured. We're now going to meet a writer who has done her own investigation into what happened next.
Now, Henry's finally got his prize, Richard. He's caught him.
Yes.
So I assume, bearing in mind it's the 3rd time Richard's tried to invade the realm, that Henry just immediately, well, has him executed, no?
No, far from it. He's always wanted to see this chap alive. He's wanted to talk to him. The next thing he does is he faces him with a confession that's already been drawn up over years by Henry's spies, and he gets him to sign it.
He signs a confession?
Yes.
What name does he give?
He gives Perry-Osbeck, which is a Flemish version of Perkin Warbeck.
The official confession states the name of the man captured by Henry is Perkin Warbeck, an imposter believed to be a boatman's son from Tournai in Flanders.
So he gets him to sign a confession that's pre-prepared. What happens then?
His treatment of Perkin Richard is extraordinary. He isn't shackled or bound at all. He's still robed as far as we know. He goes to Westminster Hall, and there it's said he just strolled into the hall arm in arm with an officer of the court. Not chained, not in any way presented as a prisoner.
This feels totally bonkers. You know, the traditional view of medieval kings, including Richard III, is when you've got someone in your way, you kill them, including your own nephews. Here, we have Henry who captures Richard, or Perkin, who's tried to take his throne at least 3 times, and he doesn't execute him. He treats him like one of the family.
Yeah, because for several European monarchs, he is one of the family. You have people like Maximilian writing to him and saying, if you kill this man, you will have killed your brother-in-law.
This is exercising the whole of European royalty, all of the big power players. The big club is activated by the capture of this person who signed a confession calling himself Perkin Warbeck.
Yes, they don't all disown him. In fact, they carry on supporting him for a long time.
And as long as he promises to be that person, what's the deal?
He gets very good treatment at court. He's not kept in any sort of confinement. He's allowed to see his wife, and she never requests a divorce, and Henry doesn't make her divorce, although one of the few reasons to get divorced in the Catholic Church is if your husband's a fraud.
It's almost like he's held as a sort of pet, as a person on display.
He's even kept like a pet, because where he is kept is in the king's wardrobe, which I have to explain is not a cupboard, it's a room, but it's still like a walk-in closet with all the king's robes, and he's sleeping in there with a guard on either side of him. There's also a ladder in the wardrobe, which could nicely go up to the window.
I see. Why is that significant?
Because he might want to get out, and he does get out.
He escapes.
He escapes. This time, Henry has lost patience. He comes back and he's sent to the Tower.
Is the treatment the same? Is it as honourable as it was before?
Certainly not. Now he's in a dungeon. He's shackled and he's tortured. And we know this from the Spanish ambassador who goes to see him and says he's disfigurado, i.e. he's had his face broken, so that he doesn't look like Richard, Duke of York.
Was he just left there to rot? What happened?
There was a plot made up that he had decided to blow up the tower. He's charged with treason, which is interesting, because if he's a Fleming, he can't be a traitor, because he's not a subject.
He's charged with treason. That only applies to an English subject. What happened to him after the trial? Is he found guilty?
Yes. And then he's sent for execution. But he does not have the traitor's death. He has a nobleman's death, in fact. The sentence for treason is to be hung, drawn, and quartered.
Yes.
But he is only hung.
And we don't know this story. We don't learn it because we learn the Tudor narrative, right?
Yes, we're satisfied with the Tudor narrative, and I don't see why anyone is satisfied with a forced confession or a confession that's cobbled together by other people and somebody is forced to sign. If it happened today, you wouldn't accept it. You'd query it as a journalist and lawyer.
Blimmin'
See? Told you. Yeah, what a story, right?
A closet, a ladder, a wife,
I know.
a son, the beginning of the Tudor dynasty.
Yeah, yeah.
Bloody hell,
It's unbelievable, isn't it? I've come down to London today because I'm going to see Rob in his chambers, and he's going to give me his conclusion. I'm off the scale anxious here because I'm going to walk into a room where I get Rob's conclusion. Which way is he going to go? Is the evidence as compelling that he's seeing? Is it not? Is he going to go with the 500 years of Tudor propaganda? Murder most foul in the Tower of London. There's kind of no going back. And I've just got to see what he's going to say.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Hiya. Nice to see you.
Do come in.
So, Philippa, at the heart of this case is whether Richard III murdered his nephews or not. The older one being Edward, the younger one being Richard, in order to gain the throne. Or could it be a missing person inquiry and they survived? I'm only interested in the evidence that supports
whether or not he killed those boys or whether they may have escaped and come to invade England. What I'm going to give you now is a summary of what I consider to be the conclusion in this case. There are 4 documents that we stopped at during our zigzag across Europe. One of them is from the Lille archive, and it's a receipt that shows that Maximilian was providing an army for the older of the boys in the tower, who was going to claim his throne in England. And I'm satisfied that that receipt is authentic and from the time. There are a further 3 documents that have been unearthed in respect of the younger of the boys in the tower, Richard. From the Dresden archive document, which is a contract promising if Richard succeeds in taking over the throne, he's going to pay that money back to Maximilian. And critically, it's got his signature on it. I'm satisfied that that is an authentic document. The Austrian archive, which again is an account where somebody takes a note of marks that were on the body of Richard. I am, again, entirely satisfied that that is a document from the time. And lastly, a document from the Gelders archive, and it's from a scribe, which may have been at the time, where a person purporting to be Richard gives a full narrative of his entire life. I had grave doubts about that document. In fact, I want to be absolutely clear with you. I took the view that it was a fake. I asked 2 independent experts, world-leading experts in their field. The bad news, I'm afraid, is that I was entirely wrong. Both of those experts take the view that it was written precisely at the period that we are focusing in. There is no way this could be a forgery from a later date.
Wow. Wow. Thank you.
Now, based on the documents that you've provided me with, on the balance of probabilities, I'm satisfied that it is perfectly possible to challenge the traditional narrative. In fact, it seems to me it is highly plausible that Edward, the older of the boys in the tower, survived. He was not killed in the tower by Richard III. It seems to me more probable than not, but he lived and he fought at the Battle of Stoke. In respect of Richard, my view is even stronger. The material you've unearthed is more than sufficient to conclude that this was not a murder. That the person who came to be known in history as Perkin Warbeck was the younger of the boys in the tower. Not only did Edward and Richard survive the tower, but they lived. They continued to live on. They tried to invade England. That they failed. You, Philippa Langley, along with your team in Europe, may just have solved the greatest mystery in British history. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this for me. Thank you. Do you know, that was big news. Heavens above, that was big news. It's overwhelming because we've had 500 years of this story being rolled out and repeated. We've changed that now. We've completely changed the conversation. I'm overjoyed.
They say lightning doesn't strike twice, but in your case it may have done. I've no doubt that Philippa's work is going to cause controversy. But the reality is, without question, Philippa's account is more persuasive based on the evidence. That's as it currently stands. History is for everybody, whoever you are, wherever you're from, to go and join in the investigation. That's the exciting thing about this. The conclusion I've reached is that one woman along with an army of other people, their energy, their enthusiasm, their determination, may have solved the greatest cold case in history.
But now it's up to the rest of the world to see what they think.